In this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Caps selection at the draft with Locked On NHL Prospects next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we have Hadi Kalakeche of Locked On NHL Prospects as we talk about the Caps selection at the draft this year. And were they ultimately the right choice? I know a lot of people thought they should get Michkov, and ultimately they got Ryan Leonard in that spot. And just to get it going here, we do have Hadi Kalakeche of Locked On NHL Prospects. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Caps had a great draft, so I'm more than happy to come and discuss it with you.
It's great to have you back on the show here. So I'm sure that this is like your Super Bowl watching the draft. And when I was watching it, I thought it was going to be Michkov. They got to the Flyers, and I'm kind of leaning forward on the couch, and there he goes. He went to the Flyers. What were your thoughts about the Capitals landing Ryan Leonard in the 8th spot in the first round? Was that the right pick, or do you ultimately believe that Michkov would have been a better selection?
Well, I mean, Matvei Michkov was in a category of his own in terms of skill set, in terms of the guys that were available in this range. So obviously, if it was there at 8, I would have definitely been, kind of scrambling to the stage to find the Capitals to go and pick him. I mean, his scoring instincts are off the charts, and the Flyers are getting a great pick with him at 7th. I'm surprised he even slipped that far. At the same time, you're not with all the Russian situation and all, but still, Ryan Leonard is a very, very good pick at 8th overall. I think that he's a great fit with what the Capitals are trying to build. If you're looking for a power forward in this draft, he is the power forward in this draft, other than Fantilli. So he's the type of player that I was looking at 8 and kind of wondering which direction the Caps would go. And then I realized that Leonard was available, and I was like, yeah, no, that's definitely the direction they're going with this. And it really makes a lot of sense for me.
Yeah, and everything that I hear about him is he seems like a prototypical Washington Capital, if that can be a thing, you know. And one of the things that the commentator was saying is that when he walked on the stage, he has muscles in his face. And I think that ultimately he has a body that he needs to grow into. If you remember Tom Wilson, when he first came into the league, he was a big guy, but kind of grew into it. Yeah. I believe that that is the case with Leonard as well, and is just kind of really lighting it up at development camp. He had a shot that was so hard that he broke one of the goalie's gloves. So it is interesting that they are getting a player that has a good shot, but not to be kind of stereotyped as just a tough guy. He brings a good skill set as well. Yeah. Ultimately, what kind of player do you think the Capitals got in Ryan Leonard? I mean, what can we see from him? I heard he's going to be at Boston College in the fall, so he's not going to be ready this next season. When the Capitals finally do get him on the big team, what can we expect?
Yeah, so that entire top line on the NTDP is going to be graduating to Boston College altogether. So Will Smith, Ryan Leonard, and Gabe Perreault are going to continue to play together. And I feel like that's going to shape Ryan Leonard into a goal-scoring power forward, even though his playmaking is really severely underrated and went underrated as a result of playing with two of the best playmakers available in the draft, and Smith and Perreault. But he's got some really good finesse about his passing ability. He can anticipate lanes and pass through them really accurately. But mainly what you're getting out of Leonard is a powerful player. With a solid frame, he's able to bulldoze through players or cut across them really well. Loves to push the pace and add some speed to the game. And especially just a blistering shot on him. So just in terms of the offensive skill set, you're getting a really well-rounded player, but with the physical abilities to become the power forward that he can be. He also can chip in defensively and played a lot at center before being matched with Smith and Perreault. Once it was matched with him, it was placed on their wing, and that was it. But he can play center and do it pretty well with his defensive abilities. So sometimes you'll see him on the penalty kill, take a face-off on the right circle, that kind of thing. So really a versatile, well-rounded player with a lot of really good kind of core physical tools that'll help him become a really good NHLer.
And I know that this is just kind of guessing. I need you to look into your crystal ball here a little bit. When would you anticipate him being available to join the Caps?
At the very worst, I'd say it might take 2 years. I think that he's pretty well physically developed. I don't think it'll take long before we see Ryan Leonard in a full-time NHL role. It might just be after next year. If we're talking honestly, it's very, very rare that a player with his profile being picked in the top 10 of a draft as good as the 2023 draft ends up not making the NHL within a year or two. He's got the frame, he's got all the physical tools, he's refined defensively. There's no specific area of his game that you can point at and be like, this is going to prevent him from being impactful in an NHL lineup, let's say in a fourth line role. I mean, he could jump into the NHL tomorrow and be a good fourth liner. For me, it's just, do you use the next 2 years in order to develop an inside game, in order to develop a delay game that's more refined? He loves to push the pace. He loves to push through defenders and go to the net and drive it and push guys back. But my question is, can he do some of what Will Smith and Gabe Perreault do, which is they hold back the play, they hold onto the puck for a second, absorb a hit, absorb a player, play through them, that kind of thing. That's what's missing from Leonard's game in order to make him a true, top end, top six player. But at the very, very least, you're getting a middle six winger out of Leonard, and a very, very good one.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I know about this team now, the Capitals. It's one of the oldest teams roster-wise in all of the NHL. So for them to have this prospects, and you consider the players they have down in Hershey, that I think it's looking really good in years to come. But just taking a look at some of his stats here, Leonard is coming off a season where he scored 51 goals in 57 games for the U18 national team. His 94 points were third most on the team. Leonard also chipped in 20 points, 11 goals, 9 assists in 17 USHL games. So I think, the goal scoring is going to be one of the things that the Caps are looking for in years to come, because we know about 3 years from now, Alex Ovechkin is going to hang up the skates, and they need these younger players to come in. It seems to me that Ryan Leonard would be a perfect fit on the Caps team of the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of what they're building, like I said, Ryan Leonard is a fantastic goal scorer, but I think that his playmaking is also underrated. You could develop him into a playmaking winger. I don't think that really gives the most out of him, especially given the fact that no matter what happens, he's going to be playing at least the next year with the same guys that made him such a good goal scorer in the NTDP and Smith and Perreault. So I think that given the development path he's already on, it's just way easier to make him a goal-scoring winger, and he would make a very, very good one. Like I said, very heavy shot, great at finding space in the middle of the ice and firing quickly. So he's got all those little habits that compound and make him a good goal scorer, and especially with Ovechkin aging and getting up there in terms of age, I think it's a really good idea to go for a guy like Ryan Leonard, who's, I'd be extremely surprised if he doesn't score 30 in the NHL one day.
And that's impressive, because a couple of the players that he looks up to are Tkachuk and Auston Matthews. And Auston Matthews just a couple seasons ago had 60 goals. So if the Caps could get any kind of production out of him similar to that, that would be great. So you do the prospect thing. This is your thing. If you are going to grade this move, this selection for the Capitals, what would you give it, A through F?
It's a safe pick. I'd give it a B. It's the type of pick that I saw the Caps making given their current situation. They're looking for guys who are going to fill up the lineup. They're looking at guys who are sure bets at making the NHL. You don't get much better than that in Ryan Leonard. There were some bets that I would have taken instead. Zach Benson was right there, and I have Zach Benson 5th overall in my personal rankings. I am a huge, huge fan of his. I think that he would have been a fantastic pick, and the most likely option after Michkov at that point to become a top liner, a true elite player. But Ryan Leonard is a sure bet to make the NHL in some capacity, and almost definitely he's going to be a second liner, borderline, probably one of the best third liners at worst is what I'd say for Ryan Leonard. So it's a decent pick for me. Nothing overwhelming in terms of risk and reward, but the type of guy who's going to make the NHL and do a good job of it.
Yeah, I had him in the NHL mock draft as well, Benson that is, but I think the Capitals ended up doing all right
Yeah.
with Ryan Leonard. All right, so coming up here, we will talk about the Caps' second pick as they pick Andrew Cristall. Was that the right pick? We'll talk about that straight ahead. Covering my nutritional basis for the day literally couldn't be easier, which is why I trust AG1. I just mix one small scoop with water and drink it first thing each morning, and then it's done. I also like that it costs less than $3 a day. Pretty good if you ask me. It's a really effective daily habit with high quality sourced ingredients. It's a win-win. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts. I have a lot of great guests, just like today, Hadi Kalakeche on the show, so make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Andrew Cristall. Cristall, I've heard all of them, but ultimately he was picked in the second round. I've heard a lot of different things. This is your bag. I have my opinions on this. Ultimately, why was Andrew picked in the second round, not the first round?
It's a big issue with inconsistency with Cristall. I mean, there are some games where he looks like a top 3 player in this draft. He looks like he's up there with the Bedards and Fantillis and Michkos and Carlsons. But there were other games where the thing is with Cristall playing on the Kelowna Rockets, where his only real kind of help offensively would be a guy like Gabriel Sturck. When he has a bad game, it stands out massively. And there were moments in the year where he wasn't getting engaged defensively. He wasn't using his skating at all. He's already kind of an average skater, so you'd expect him to up the pace, kind of like a Zach Benson, who's constantly on fifth gear. Cristall is not. So those are some elements, along with the lack of size, that made him slip down. There isn't usually a big market for smaller players who don't skate all that well and don't have that high-end intensity. Outside of that, though, Andrew Cristall, skill-wise, is a top 10 pick in any other draft. I think that, if you just look at the skill set alone, he's definitely top 10 in this class. The goal scoring ability is insane. The playmaking, the stick handling, especially, he's a wizard with the puck, and especially he's really smart with it. Even Connor Bedard himself called him the smartest player he's ever played with. So, when the best player in the draft is telling something like that about a prospect like Cristall who slips into the 40s, it's very strange to me that it was available that far down in the draft.
So that leads me to my next question here. Are you surprised that he went in the second round, or did you have him pegged at being in the first round?
I had him as a top 15 player. I had him 12th or 13th overall in that kind of range. So it's easy for me because I don't work for an NHL team. I'm not kind of tied to a specific kind of risk of losing my job or anything like that if I swing hard on a high risk, high reward player. And that's exactly what Cristall is. There's a decent likelihood that he doesn't make the NHL. There's a decent likelihood that, his lack of intensity, his lack of defensive engagement, his lack of high-end skating holds him back and makes him kind of struggle to flourish in an offensive role because he's not getting a lot of puck touches when he's on the ice. It's a likelihood. I just think that the skill set and the intelligence with the puck is just so high end. It's so refined that, if you can work on his skating, if you can make him just at least a baseline average or slightly above average skater, you're getting a fantastic offensive dynamo out of Cristall. He's just, the word for him is dynamic. I come back to that word every time. The dynamism on Cristall is just off the charts. It's very hard to match it outside of the top 3. So to have him at 40, for me, this is one of the steals of the draft, given the value that the Caps added. Yes, it's a high risk pick, but the reward could be an elite player.
Yeah, because that's everything that I've heard about him at development camp as well, is that he's a bit undersized. If we just take a look at his particulars, 5'10", 175 pounds.
Yep.
That is a bit small. And, it's one of the things, if you're like Leonard, where he's already tall, you can kind of grow into that frame. It's going to be difficult for him, because if I even look at Connor McMichael and Hendrik Slop here, two of the issues that they had with their NHL call-ups was their size. They got pushed off the puck easy, and one of the things they told them about was to bulk up, to, work out a little bit.
Yep.
So I think that would be good advice for Cristall as well. So the interesting thing about him is ultimately, where does he fit? It's your assessment, and that's an interesting thing to say. This is the first I've heard it, is there's the possibility that he might not ever be an NHL player. That's the kind of a tough role for a player of his caliber, being called one of the smartest players, the smartest player that Connor Bedard has ever played with, and then vacillate that between the fact that you might not even make an NHL team.
Yep.
That's got to be kind of tough, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's all about mitigating risk with Cristall. Is what do you work on? Because you don't need to work on his playmaking at all. I mean, he can take any average looking play and turn it into a high skill, kind of dangerous chance out of nowhere. The goal scoring ability, you get him the puck anywhere below the circles, below the top of the circles, and he's scoring essentially, and he's got fantastic hands. So you don't need to touch his skill set at all. It's already at a high end level. All you need to work on is adding some gears to his skating, maybe tweaking his skating stride could even work out his stamina issues, because a lot of the times near the end of shifts, he's not engaged at all. He's just kind of trying his best to conserve his energy enough to be able to make it to the bench. So maybe tweaking his skating makes him more efficient, and his stride makes him more efficient throughout a shift. So that's kind of two birds, one stone right there. So it's just about, what do you work on with Cristall to make sure that you bring out as much of his offensive skill set as possible, and make sure that he gets as many puck touches as possible, because that's where Cristall excels with the puck. As long as you're able to get him the puck often enough, you're getting an elite player out of Cristall. Because if he's playing on a third, fourth line, most of the time those lines don't get as many puck touches as the top six. So it's really a boomer bust situation with him, where if he's not playing in a top six, he's not going to get enough puck touches to become the elite player that he can be. So that's really what needs to be worked on, is just making sure that the right development objectives are kind of targeted.
And it doesn't always necessarily translate. That's one of the things that I love about development camp, is you heard that this player was this guy or that guy. Seeing is believing. And with Leonard, I believed it. He is going to be a great player. And I think that Cristall potentially could be that great player, but it doesn't necessarily always translate, does it? I mean, if you take a look at Shane Wright last year, everyone thought he was going to go number one overall, and look at where he is right now. So it's an interesting for the position for the Capitals to be in. Just kind of looking at his contract, he is not eligible to play with the AHL team next year. So it's either, the NHL team, which isn't going to be the case, or it's going to be the Kelowna Rockets. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, for me, a lot of what could help for Cristall would be to get out of Kelowna, to find a different market in which to excel. He's really good when surrounded by skilled teammates. We saw a different Andrew Cristall at the World Juniors, a more engaged Cristall who was able to connect plays a lot better because he could trust his teammates to do the right thing with the puck. A lot of the times when Cristall looks bad, it's because his passes aren't connecting, but his passes aren't connecting not necessarily because he's making bad reads, but maybe because his teammates are. So it's important to get him on a team that is well stacked in terms of skill set, in terms of intelligence as well. He was playing with a lot of players who kind of fit more of the checking role, and that's not what he needs on his line. He needs a finisher on his line. He needs a connector on his line. If you switch Ryan Leonard and Andrew Cristall's situation, let's say Cristall was American and he was playing on a top line in the NTDP with Will Smith and Gabe Perreault, there is no way he would have been 40th overall, because he would have the connector and the finisher on his line that he needed. So yes, he will have to go back to the WHL. Does he have to stay with Kelowna? No, not necessarily. Do I think he should stay in Kelowna? Even worse. That would be a bad situation for him. So for me, just making sure that he goes on a contender, a team that's going to have a deep playoff run, where he's going to have to dig deep in his reserves and put as much energy into every shift as possible. I want to see Cristall play some meaningful playoff games in the WHL.
So if you're going to grade this selection, what would you give it?
It's an A. I really like Cristall. I believe in the skill set. I think that at 40th overall, he was well overdue. I thought for sure he'd be a first rounder, and if he wasn't, it was going to be for the concerns about size and projectability. But there isn't, like I said, he's got a top 10 skill set in this draft, and to get a top 10 skill set player in the draft at 40th overall is fantastic value for the Caps.
So some good moves for the Caps. All right, so coming up here, we will talk about the other selections at the draft. Yes, there's more of them. All we really heard about was Leonard and Cristall, but there is more. Who are those players? We'll talk about that straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In today's episode, we have Hadi Kalakeche of NHL Prospects and also from Dobber Prospects. So this guy knows this turf. This is what he does. So the next selection was Patrick Thomas in the 4th round. Again, it was one of the players that we did not hear as much about. Tell me a little bit about him and what you know about him. I've read, pieces about him here, but the most information we have available is on Leonard and Cristall. What kind of player are the Capitals getting with Patrick Thomas?
I mean, he's an overager, but I want to add an asterisk to that. He is probably the youngest overager to get picked in this year's draft. He was 1 month away from being a first-time draft eligible in this draft. He's an August 04 birthday, which made him one of the youngest players in the 22 draft. So overager is a bit rich. He's still 18, quite literally. So, in terms of what you're getting in terms of the skill set, you're getting a great playmaker, a guy who's able to connect plays really well. I did have trouble with my viewings of him regarding his defensive engagement, regarding his effort level. There are some things that I wanted to see kind of come a long way, in that sense. But at the end of the day, Thomas's playmaking is so refined. He's able to find players in stride a lot. He loves to get engaged in transitions as well. He's the type of player who's going to hang on to the puck in transition and wait for a teammate to hit the exact right pocket at the exact right speed at the exact right time, which is what you want from a playmaking center. But kind of improving the skating, improving the defensive engagement will come a long way. And I feel like, especially given the fact that, for me, he's basically a draft eligible. If you look at his production this year, 56 points in 66 games as an 18-year-old is great production. I feel like that's the type of production that you would look at a draft eligible have in the OHL and be like, yeah, no, we're taking a swing on him in the mid rounds. So a perfectly reasonable pick for Washington here. And he's going to continue to develop with the Brantford Bulldogs now. They've changed from Hamilton to Brantford. But yeah, no, that's a decent OHL team that he's on that's going to continue to give him good opportunities. Is going to see the top 6 eventually and get some great opportunities to kind of showcase his playmaking skill.
So just taking a look at him as well, it's being said that he is a defensively responsible center that led the Bulldogs in scoring last season with 56 points, 17 goals, 39 assists in 66 games. Seems like a pretty solid pick, all things considered, in the 4th round. If you are going to grade this selection, what would you grade it?
It'd definitely be kind of the B- C+ range. It's about an average pick for me in this range. I have heard that some people are high on his defensive engagement. I have my questions. I feel like a lot of what he does will work in the OHL, but not necessarily at higher levels, especially at pro. Some of his scanning habits are off. Sometimes he'll look over his left shoulder, not his right, and get caught, that kind of thing. So just tweaking some things would make him a really good player. But at the end of the day, it's a perfectly reasonable pick. Once you hit the 4th round, you're looking for those types of guys who went overlooked last year, but still have some value this year. I feel like Patrick Thomas definitely fits that kind of mold.
So it was all forwards up until this point, but they did select a defenseman as well, Cameron Allen. One of the things we hear about this team all the time is they need to address the blue line. I know he's not going to help them next season, and I don't know ultimately when, but at some point he seems to be, potentially the kind of guy that could help them out. Allen's rookie season in the OHL opened scouts' eyes as he put up 37 points, 13 goals, 24 assists in 65 games after entering the 22-23 campaign with a lot of hype. After he fell on the page a bit, as he was only able to grab 25 points, 5 goals, 20 assists. Talk to me a little bit here about Cam Allen. Was he a good pick for the Caps?
At 136, absolutely. So here's the thing with Allen is he gave me headaches a lot of the time this year. I would watch him and he would make just the most absurd decisions that would have me pulling my hair, just like point shots for no reason, no deception, no manipulation, just basically throwing everything on net that he could. You can sense the frustration in a guy when his team's struggling, when he's struggling, and he's just trying to put the puck in the back of the net. The thing is, I like to see composure from defensemen. I like to see manipulation from the point from defensemen, especially defensemen with the toolkit that he has. So the thing is, at the start of the year, he was kind of a top 10 kind of range player in this draft, and then fell out massively in multiple scouts' eyes. But it was basically around November, December when Dobber Prospects, we had our first scouting meet, and some guys were arguing for Allen in the top 15. And I was like, for me, he looks more like a mid-second round pick. And since then, my opinion didn't change. He's always been kind of a mid-second round pick type of guy. So this kind of slip to 136 to me is a massive overcorrection. I understand the concerns. A lot of his decision-making issues were rough. Defensively, he would pinch at the weirdest times and just leave his line mate in, open water defensively, facing a 2-on-1, 3-on-1, that kind of thing. But the toolkit is definitely there. He's one of the most physical, defensemen in this draft. Fantastic skater, a heavy shot, even though he needs to use it better. Great playmaking, even though he needs to use it better. It's just the toolkit itself is great. All we need to work on is just making sure that we tone down the frustration, make him more composed, more calm, both offensively and defensively. For me, this is a fantastic bet at 136. I was almost certain he'd be gone by the end of the second round. So to see him gone at 136 is great value.
Yeah, so Ross Mahoney, who does a lot of this kind of thing at the draft and the scouts, always does a really good job. Always an excellent job picking the right player. If I even look to last year with Ivan Miroshnichenko,
yep.
Just a really good ability to kind of see through the lines a little bit and say, well, he has this Hodgkin's lymphoma, but I think the potential is there for him to still be a great player.
Yeah.
And he really kind of jumped off the page in development camp. I know this was last season's draft, but if people aren't aware, what kind of player are the Caps getting in Ivan Miroshnichenko?
Miroshnichenko is a really intense offensive forward. He loves to kind of push the pace. He bulldogs through players. Not necessarily the type of guy who's going to identify opportunities to win pucks back, but a great scorer, decent passing as well, is able to distribute and move into open space really well. Decent hands. But what really always stood out for me with Miroshnichenko was the intensity. The main issue with me was the decision making, especially in this draft year. Hodgkin's lymphoma is a whole thing, and I'm glad he's doing better. But before that, he was starting to slip in my rankings, mainly because I saw some concerns with when he was taking shots, when he was hitting pockets of space, and when he was trying to pass. He's passing up opportunities for great shots by trying to pass, and he was passing up opportunities for great passes by shooting. So it was just working on that decision-making and tweaking it. And I feel like that's come a long way since this draft year, which I'm really impressed with, because it's a difficult thing to kind of nail down and develop properly.
Yeah, I think a good pick for the Caps, and the good thing for me is he was able to break off his contract with his KHL team, and it's being that he might even be playing with Hershey next season, so that's exciting to think about. I don't want anyone to think that I forgot about the other two picks. Also, Brett Hyland and Antoine Keller, a French goalie, which we don't know whatever is going to happen with that, but in any event, I'm always intrigued by the netminders that the Capitals select. Listen, Hadi, I want to thank you for joining us once again on this edition of Locked On Capitals. Of course, you do Locked On NHL Prospects, but tell everyone a little bit about yourself and where we can find your work.
Yeah, so the one-stop shop is Twitter. That's where I post everything. If you're watching on YouTube, it's right below my face. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, it's Hadi K_scouting. Again, that's HADIK_scouting. Everything I write, everything I do in terms of podcasts, all of that goes there. You can also find the podcast at LO_NHL Prospects.
And Hadi, thanks once again for joining us on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And thank you all for joining us on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And are you a fan of other DC sports? Well, Locked On has got you covered. We got Locked On Nationals, Commanders, and Wizards. So no matter what major DC sport it is, Locked On has got you covered. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.